Hi, everybody. Welcome to Participedia's Democratic Teaching and Learning webinar series. My name is Bettina von Lieres. I'm an assistant professor of international development studies at the University of Toronto in Scarborough. And together with Dr. Joanna Ashworth, I coordinate and co-chair Participedia's Teaching and Learning Committee. I'd like to welcome everybody to our first webinar. Wonderful to have so many people from so many parts of the world joining us. And please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat room. Some people have already started to do that, and so please just introduce yourself. This webinar is part of a series of Participedia's Teaching, Training and Mentoring Committee. The purpose of this webinar series is to mobilize knowledge on participatory methods for democratic engagement, particularly with a focus on higher education and community engagement. Before I introduce our speakers for today, I just want to explain a few things about Participedia for those who do not know much about Participedia, to set the context. So a brief overview of Participedia. Participedia is a global community collaboration, sharing knowledge and stories about public participation and focusing on mapping new forms of participatory politics and governance. Participedia is directed by Arkon Fung from Harvard University and Mark Warren from the University of British Columbia. Participedia is made up of 31 partner organizations from diverse locations across the world. And each of these partner organizations and collaborators contribute cases to the platform. Participedia's core research question focuses on what kinds of participatory democratic innovations work best for specific purposes under specific conditions. And there are several project goals that bring Participedia together. So we map democratic innovations across the world in both the global north and the global south. We explain how and why these democratic innovations emerge. We assess their contributions to the deepening of democracy. We are interested in how knowledge about new forms of democratic innovations can be transferred and translated into practice. And we're also interested in developing a new model of collaboration for diverse participants in the social sciences. So today's webinar focuses on what and how do we teach using Participedianet, with a specific focus on how we use cases from Participedia in our classrooms. And I would now like to introduce our two very special guests, Tina Nabatchi from Syracuse University and Graham Smith from the University of Westminster. So we'll start off with Graham. Graham Smith is Professor of Politics and Director of the Center for the Study of Democracy at the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Westminster. He's also the chair of the Foundation for Democracy and Sustainable Development. Graham has published widely on democratic theory and practice, including the influential book, Democratic Innovations, Designing Institutions for Citizen Participation. Graham has played a leading role in the development of Participedia since its early days and has integrated the platform into his teaching at both postgraduate and undergraduate levels. Tina Nabatchi is an Associate Professor of Public Administration and International Affairs and a 10th decade scholar at the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University. She is also a faculty research associate at the Program for the Advancement of Research on Conflict and Collaboration, where she co-directs the Collaborative Governance Initiative. Tina's research focuses on citizen participation, collaborative governance, conflict resolution, and challenges in public administration. She's the lead editor of Democracy in Motion, evaluating the practice and impact of deliberative civic engagement, a book published in 2012, and she has recently published 2 books, Public Participation for 21st Century Democracy with Matt Leiniger and Collaborative Governance Regimes with Kirk Emerson. A very warm welcome to both Graham and Tina, and I'll hand over to Graham now. So we'll begin with Graham's presentation. We will then hear from Tina, and we will then open up the chat line for questions. Graham, over to you.
Okay, well, thanks very much, and welcome everybody. I think actually the chat line is open for questions now. So if something I say prompts something you're interested in, then please add it as you feel. I don't seem to have control of the deck, unfortunately, and it seems to have got back to the first. Oh, there we go. It's come back. Fantastic. So what I thought I would do is actually tell you about how I use Participedia in the classroom and how I've developed my thinking about it over the last 10 years or so. I've taught with Participedia both at postgraduate and undergraduate level. Currently, I'm teaching at undergraduate level in second year undergraduates. And during that time, I've wrestled with a number of issues, not all related to Participedia particularly, but I think they're issues which any of us who have been trying to teach around participatory governance have had to deal with. The first one is about how to balance theory and practice, when to introduce theory, when to introduce practical examples, and in what order. Traditionally, I had taught the course from theory to practice. So I taught introducing students to theoretical ideas and then focusing on practical examples. But that caused some problems, which I'll talk about. I'll talk about in a minute. The other thing I thought was really critical as I've been teaching this is really getting students to understand the importance of design characteristics of different types of democratic innovation. There's still this tendency, it's a tendency amongst academics, obviously none of us, but it's a tendency amongst academics to talk about participation in general, or generalize from a single case, and really to try and get my students to understand that actually these participatory forms of participatory governance vary considerably and therefore have different democratic effects. So since 2014, since I started teaching at the University of Westminster, I've actually not only used Participedia to provide examples, but actually required students to create a new case for Participedia. And I think this has been personally, I think this has been a really exciting development, but not without its costs, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. So I sell the course to students not only as an opportunity to learn about democratic theory and democratic practice, but also as an opportunity to contribute to a global research project. So students at the end of the course will have written a new case of something that's of a participatory example of a participatory process that's not on Participedia, and then have the opportunity at that point to upload it. It's not a requirement of the course that they do upload it, but they build up to the point when they can do. And I see that as sort of something really quite novel about the course. I've also shifted my practice, whereas I used to introduce democratic theory early in the course and then talk about democratic innovations. I've actually switched it around and found that that's been a much more productive way of teaching. And the reason I say that is because if you just teach democratic theory in abstract, I've realised particularly undergraduate students, but also postgraduates, have no way of locating it beyond their everyday practices. And their everyday practices are typically voting or politics as an observer. So I've tried now to actually introduce different types of democratic innovation early, so students can understand the ways in which they vary, and then reflect on them theoretically in the second half of the course, looking at historical ideas from Athens and participatory democracy, deliberative democracy, and other ideas. So I think for me, that was something that took me about 5 to 6 years to realise that was the best way for me to teach it. I'm not saying it's necessarily the best way, but we typically move from theory to practice. But I think democratic innovations are a particular area where it's actually works incredibly well for students to understand what's happening on the ground before they think about it in real conceptual ways. And actually what happens is they start to think conceptually about the innovations as they begin to compare them. And then so it's not a big jump then to move to theoretical ideas. Whoops. So I thought what I would talk to you about is how I familiarise students with Participedia and how it becomes part of the course. So the first thing to say is Participedia is introduced in the first lecture, and it's introduced as both a resource for the course and also as immediately to show them this is the sort of thing, these are the sorts of cases that I'm expecting you to produce through the course. Then we use Participedia throughout the early part of the course when we're introducing democratic innovations in the class, and maybe some of them will go away and search for particular examples so that they can do some in-class reading and kind of sharing, etc. And I've given you a couple of examples here. And when I do participatory budgeting, I'll get them to look at the Porto Alegre case and the Recife case. With British Columbia, I'll get them with mini publics, I'll get them to look at the British Columbia case and other examples. What's really useful is, and I think many of you may have found this, it's actually quite hard to find good descriptions of cases in the classroom. What's really easy with academic literature is to find theoretic conceptual analysis of particular cases, but very often there isn't a rich description there, or there's a partial description. I think one of the great things about Participedia is it will give a very typically, I mean, you've got to choose your case as well, but it will give good descriptions of those cases, which is incredibly valuable. Then in about week 4, I introduced them having looked at Participedia over 2 to 3 weeks. But as part of a lecture, when I'm talking about the assignments in more detail, I explain to them how a Participedia case is actually structured. So both the narrative case description, the long description, and how different people order that information, and also the data form. And that's quite important to go through that data form, because that's really new to students, and show them what sort of data Participedia is trying to collect and why, and getting it into their heads that this is the sort of thing that they're going to have to be doing. At that point, I also provide them with lists of cases that are currently not on Participedia. Some of this Participedia already collects cases that it thinks will be interesting, but I know of other projects and other websites, etc., where there are examples and cases that haven't made it onto Participedia. So the students have a bunch of cases that they know they could go to if they wanted to. What's interesting is about, I think, at least half of them go and find a completely different case, often related to the country they come from. Westminster is one of the most diverse universities in the world. Therefore, the students will be bringing cases, potentially can get cases from all over the place, and in languages from material where English isn't the primary language. So that's a very rich source. And then basically over the next few weeks, students begin to build up elements of that case, which are then discussed in the seminars. Now, in week 7, which is we run a 12-week course, in week 7 we get students to submit a case summary, a short summary of 500 words, and I'll explain this in more detail in a second, where the teaching staff can check that they've actually found a case. It's amazing how many times you've spent 6 weeks explaining to people what a case is, and what you get back is actually an organisation, or it's something like a parliamentary committee or something. It's not a case of participatory governance. And this allows you to catch students before they've done the whole project and get some sort of sense of where they are and whether or not you think there's enough material in order for them to build that case. And then in week 14, the students submit a full case through the normal electronic system we've got, as a Word document, and that's then marked and feedback is given to them. Once the feedback's given to the students, they're then invited to upload those cases to Participedia, taking into account the feedback. And extra support is offered to them by one of my students who's employed as part of the Participedia grant to help them turn that piece of work they did into a Participedia case. It's all structured exactly as it already is a Participedia case, so it's not that difficult for them. So just here's a couple of examples. There's quite a few on Participedia of work that my students have done. These are of second year students, so this is typically 19, 20-year-olds. One of them did a case on participatory budgeting in Sevilla, another one on participatory budgeting in Milan. It's interesting, students get very excited about PB actually, but these are just two examples. There are other ones on other forms of engagement that I could have shown you. But for these students now, as you can imagine, they're very excited about having actually published, and a couple of them have done extra ones since and have worked with me since. So just before I finish, I've got a couple of things. I'll just tell you a little bit about the assignments, because that's kind of useful material for those of you thinking about doing this sort of thing. And then some of the pros and cons about what I've discovered. So the first thing they hand in is a case summary, which is a 1,000-word summary of what they hope to do, and that's worth 20% of the final course mark. They're asked to give a brief description of the case, its location, structure, participants, sponsoring organisation, etc. Why they think it's an interesting democratic innovation to study, which gets them to think a little bit about the conceptual side, and then also the sources, importantly, the sources they're going to use to develop the summary into a full entry. And that may actually include interviews with organisers. So some of my students have actually gone, the Milan case includes primary research by the student, an Italian student, with the authority, with the public authority. Then the final assessment, which is worth 70%, is the 3,000-word full Participedia case. And that just follows the normal Participedia case description guidance, except I do require from them an analysis and lessons learned section, which is already in Participedia, but I require them for that to be at least 500 words. And that it requires them to do some critical analysis of the case with reference to similar cases they've learnt about on the course and the theoretical material that's taught on the course. So my students that have put things on Participedia, you can kind of tell which ones they are, because they then relate the particular element to the particular case to theoretical, to certain conceptual developments that they've seen. I should also say that I provide a copy of the data form in Word, which the students fill out, which they then can literally transfer and copy over onto the Participedia form. So they don't have to create the data form. That's already there for them. And I'm happy to share that, and have shared it with the teaching committee, and I'm happy for it to be on the Participedia website. And just to say, those of you who are smart, there's 10% left, and that's actually through weekly seminar tasks. So that's how I build the course. So finally, I just want to talk a little bit about a strange paradox that I've come across, and some of you may be well aware of. So the first thing is the feedback on the course is great. I've had extremely good feedback, and the students at the end of it say they really enjoyed the different challenge and have performed well. And they really like the fact that they're not doing another essay. Now, the caveat on that is those students who don't turn up do really badly, because they don't know they get to week 11 and week 12 and realise they don't know what a Participedia case study is. So those who come do extremely well. It's it doesn't look like your normal bell curve, basically, of which you normally get with essays. The second thing is students are really positive but nervous about the potential of contributing to a global research project. They like the idea of it, but they're not used to it. And one thing I've found is students are increasingly conservative about this. So there's this real push for novelty in terms of assessment methods, but actually students get worried about that. They do like the fact that they can add to their CV if they have uploaded the case, that they have been a Participedia intern, and I think that's a kind of valuable thing. So what's actually happened is that this used to be a core course at Westminster, and 2 years ago it became, or 3 years ago it became an optional course. And since it became an optional course, I've only run it 1 year because I haven't had enough students. And doing reviews with students is not because they don't like me. I get very good reviews on my first year course that I teach. But what they're really worried about is the assignment. And I really haven't quite worked out how to get over that hurdle. So once they're on the course, they love it, and they really do well in the assignment, but actually getting over that hurdle. So I think there are really interesting ways of teaching with Participedia. I think there are also some challenges we've got to get over in terms of novelty. I hope that makes some sense. I hope that may have generated some thoughts and questions. What I'm going to do now is hand over to Tina, who will talk to you about how she's used Participedia in a very different way in her classes. So over to you, Tina. Tina, are you there?
Hi, Tina, are you there?
That's not supposed to happen.
Yep. Tina, I think you need to unmute. We just got some excellent advice from Robert. Hi, Tina. Tina, can you try unmuting?
She's saying that her unmute controls have disappeared.
Okay.
And someone's saying, move your mouse at the bottom of the screen. This is the point to say that Tina is actually the experienced one.
Okay.
Oh, she's there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you, Tina.
Yes.
Great to have you back. Yeah.
Yes, apologies for that. I'm clearly not the expert, but when control was given to me, my other pieces went away. So apologize for that. So I'm really thrilled to be here. I know that Graham has used Participedia as a very exciting way to have students develop cases. When I taught a class on public participation and participatory innovations, I found that having students develop cases was wonderful, but my students, in addition to the theory side of it, also wanted to learn some of the skills associated with public participation. And as I was doing this, I found that there were very few tools out there to help teachers teach skills and to help students learn those skills. And this is a real challenge, as a growing number of universities around the world are introducing courses on public participation, on democratic innovations. But the lack of materials, I think, really hampers the development of students' knowledge. So as part of my work with Participedia, I have pulled students into helping develop a variety of teaching and learning materials. And we are doing 3 big pieces. First, we are working on a number of publications that will help inform practitioners about Participedia cases, but also participation more broadly. We are also creating presentations for instructors, tools that they can use in the classroom to help them explain a variety of different concepts associated with participation. And then finally, we're developing teaching cases, activities, and exercises. And I will discuss these all very briefly. So, whoops, oh my goodness. Sorry, everyone. I'm totally having some challenges here. Okay, so the first thing that we've done are publications for practitioners. And what I essentially asked my students to do was go read a bunch of cases on Participedia, find cases that speak to you and that you think will inform the world of practice, and then write short publications for this. So our students have, their goal was to identify a number of practitioner outlets, whether those were in higher education, for school boards or for teachers, for crime and policing, to identify practitioner outlets, then to find cases that would be of interest to those particular audiences, and then to do short write-ups about those cases. The easiest place for us to get in, and we actually were very successful this past semester, was in PA Times, which is essentially public administration newsletter that goes out to thousands of practitioners in the United States and around the world. And so we've had 4 pieces published so far. The first one was just an introductory piece introducing people to Participedia. Second was about women and women's rights and empowering women in Pakistan. The third one was about participatory health in Brazil. And the final one was about PB in Paris. All of these students are master's students. They're masters of public administration. And so they were really excited about this because they were able to put these on their CVs as publications. And in fact, even though their GA-ship has ended, several of them are still working on additional pieces because the idea of publication is really exciting to them. The second piece we did was really something that spoke to me and my challenge when I was teaching this course about finding ways to teach different participation skills to students. And so my group of students, the GAs that were working on this, actually came up with the idea of using the online skills module to the book that Matt Leininger and I wrote in 2015 about 10 key talents for engaging citizens. So they took this chapter, they created a broad, big picture overview about Participedia and the 10 key talents, and then they started to create separate presentations on each talent. So they would talk about what the skill was, they would use Participedia cases to illustrate the concepts and ideas, and then they concluded with an exercise that teachers could have their students do in the classroom. So on this slide, you can see what the 10 key talents are. The ones in the circle: building coalitions and networks, managing conflict, managing discussions, idea generation, ideation, group decision-making, how we support participants from moving from discussion to action, and then how we evaluate participation, which is one of my favorite things to do. We have presentations on all of those. The 3 blocks on the right: how we do participant recruitment, how we communicate about participation, and how we provide options and information to participants. We don't yet have presentations on. I won't show you the general presentation, but I will show you really quickly the presentation on managing discussions. Hopefully this link will work. But it doesn't seem to be. But anyway, the links are there, so you can check those out. And if anybody is really interested in seeing these, I would be more than happy to share with them. But here are some of the challenges that I've had in doing this work with my students. So first is, this group of students was unbelievably productive, and I know as a faculty member I shouldn't be complaining about that, but they would come to me on a weekly basis, either with articles or a presentation or with questions. And so the idea of how do I build the internal capacity to review all of these materials and provide substantive feedback was a real challenge. There's also the question of how do we build the capacity for students. We have one course at the Maxwell School in the Public Administration program that looks at participation and collaboration. Not every student takes it. It's an optional course. And in fact, the students working on this project with me this semester didn't have that course. So there was a learning curve there of helping students become not just familiar with Participedia, but with participation and with democratic innovations. A second challenge is that there's really very little information about what instructors need and want when it comes to teaching participation in the classroom. We know that these courses are happening around the world, but there hasn't been a way to communicate with all of those instructors to find out what their challenges are, what activities they would like to have, what resources would make teaching about participation more useful to them. And then finally, I really would like some external review, particularly of these presentations. What would make these presentations useful to instructors and to students out there? I know what I think, and Matt and I think, are the 10 key talents. We wrote this chapter. This is all based on our kind of thinking. And as where people are talking, as if I were to use these presentations, for example, I would know exactly what I was speaking about. But I don't know if they're useful to somebody picking these up in Brazil or Argentina or India or New Zealand or anywhere around the world. So I would love to figure out a way to get feedback from instructors who are not necessarily part of Participedia. For me, though, the opportunity to use Participedia to engage students has been incredibly rewarding. The students have loved this work. They have put it on their CVs, as Graham was saying, and they really find a source of pride in doing this. So it's an incredibly useful tool, I think, and the challenge now is to figure out how, at least from my perspective, how we scale the information on Participedia and make it useful to instructors and students around the world. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Bettina, and I will apologize for my technological challenges.
Thank you very much, Tina, and thank you very much, Graham, for sharing your really innovative use of Participedia in your classrooms. I think there's some excellent ideas. And Tina, don't apologize. We all struggle. What we'll do now is I'm starting to make a list of the questions in the chat box. We've put everybody on mute just because there are so many participants, but I will run through the questions. I'll kick off with some of the questions that have already been posted. Please continue to post questions. There will also be an opportunity to continue chatting with each other after the webinar ends. And Scott Fletcher, one of our Participedia collaborators, will be with you if you'd like to continue chatting. So one of the first questions posted, Graham and Tina, is about the kinds of collaborative working tools that your students are using in the classroom, for group or individual projects. I wonder if both of you could speak a bit about the kinds of, I guess, tools for collaboration in the classroom that you use. Perhaps Graham, kick off with Graham.
Yeah, I'm a bit old school on that, I'm afraid. Not afraid. I mean, it's just the traditional small working groups in the classes. So people will bring bits of work and share it with each other, and we'll review each other's work there and then. So one of the questions was whether or not my projects were individual or collaborative. They are very individual in that each student is doing a different case, but they have opportunities to share what they're finding with each other, and actually that's really helpful for them to begin to realize that actually these cases are very different from each other. So I don't use any particular tools, or that it's more sort of face-to-face seminar techniques rather than anything like that. I think the person was probably thinking about some of the electronic and digital tools, and I hadn't really investigated that. So sorry about that, David. Nothing exciting to report.
Tina?
I think I have a similar unexciting response to David. My students use Dropbox or Google Docs as platforms for sharing information and collaborative writing. But beyond that, I am unaware of any collaborative platforms that they use. I'd love to hear suggestions about tools that are out there for the classroom.
Okay. Thank you very much. There was another question about what level your students are at. Are these undergrads, postgrads, graduate students? And do you have any ideas about, I guess, how the level that students are at, whether there's a more suitable level for the kind of work you're doing in your classrooms? Does it work better with master's students as opposed to undergraduate students? Graham?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I saw this question from Ricky, which is a bit odd because I'm sure Ricky used to actually teach this course with me, but there we go. So he should know. The course that I'm teaching at the moment is second year, and second year undergraduate. So we're talking about people who aren't that skilled in terms of their knowledge of democratic practices. Most of them wouldn't know had never heard the term democratic innovation before they started the course. So they are at a very basic level. They've done a couple of courses. They've done a first year course with me on democracy in crisis and a general political theory and international relations course as well. But no, they aren't that skilled in this. And that's why we take them through this careful process of developing the cases. What they do really like and enjoy doing is engaging with the practical, with a practical case, because a lot of the work you do within political science can be fairly abstract and conceptual. I haven't taught it at master's level for a while. I think the quality can be a bit better, but not always. And the students who actually move from doing the coursework to actually putting it on Participedia, they're typically the students who get first class or high, what we call a 2-1 high grade. So these are students who are producing good work and then want to share it. Occasionally I'll get a student who didn't do a particularly good job who wants to put it on Participedia, and then we've just got to do some work with them trying to make sure it's up to the a kind of standard to share. But that's it. So for me, I think you can do it at any level, to be honest, as long as you've got the right support there.
Great. Tina?
I agree with Graham that this could work at any level. The students that I tend to work with are master's students. The majority of them are master's students in public administration or in international relations. So they have a deep interest in very practical skills that they can use in their professional careers on the ground with communities of interest, with citizens, with different groups. I occasionally will work with a doctoral student, but the doctoral students are far more interested in the research aspects of Participedia and far more interested in publishing journal articles. So I do have a couple of doctoral students who are using data from Participedia right now to help inform some articles that they're working on. And the final thing that I'll say is that occasionally my students are executive students, executives, masters of public administration, which means that they have 10, 15, 20 years of professional experience. And they really appreciate the diversity of cases on Participedia. For many of them, they have a desire to be more innovative in the ways that they interact with citizens, but they don't have any models for that. And I think the Participedia cases really help them think through different ways they can engage their publics.
Okay. There's a question here from Lucy. I'll come back to some of the previous questions, but I thought this one was good to take at this stage. Graham and Tina, do you think that using Participedia requires a dedicated course on democratic innovations, or could some aspects be integrated into a broader politics unit?
I think it absolutely could be integrated into a broader politics unit and into lots of different settings. So, for example, if you're teaching a case teaching a course in the field of criminology or on crime and policing, or if you're teaching a case on teaching a course on public policy, whether that's social policy broadly or very specific policy, environmental policies or labor policies, the breadth and diversity of cases in Participedia, I think, is just absolutely fascinating. And a simple search would help you, I think, identify relevant cases for your work. And it would actually be another, I think, wonderful teaching resource if we could figure out ways to sort cases or show cases that might be useful in different kinds of instructing settings.
Right. Graham?
I would go with what Tina said. I think, what Participedia can do for people quite quickly is to show them what I was saying in my presentation, how participation, the format of participation can affect both the participant experience and potential outcomes. So I can imagine if you were doing a week on participatory democracy, or on a more general course, that you could show, get students to look at 2 or 3 of these cases as a way of making it clear to them about different styles. And I agree, I've used it for particular types of engagement on particular courses around environmental politics, for example. But I think it's particularly well suited, obviously, for teaching a course on that specific area. But I think it can be used in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah. If I can just jump in here, I've used a Participedia assignment exercise in a course on theories of citizenship, to really illustrate some of the complexities of the politics of citizenship. But the course didn't have a specific focus on democratic innovations. Great. And just a follow-on question from Ricky, for Graham, actually. As Participedia has scaled up, has it been more difficult to find new original case studies that are not already on the platform? And I guess specifically here for students to find new original case studies. Yeah.
Well, I can actually start to respond to another question by answering that, which someone was saying that there don't seem to be many, that the coverage of Participedia isn't very good across authoritarian and non-democratic regimes, or particularly outside of the US and Europe. And I think we're very well aware of that, and trying to find strategies for developing that. So my one source of these cases is those countries which are actually poorly served. And I think there are more challenges as we get more cases up there. But there are always, I mean, we can go on to other sites and other platforms and see cases that we haven't got covered that they have. And the thing that is important is making it clear to the students that it's finding more than one source. So it's not enough that you've got a kind of a one website which talks about a particular case. But at the moment, I'm not too worried about it. I think there's so much going on out there. It's going to get more difficult, but I don't think we're at that stage yet. It's and if you just think about PB, there are just hundreds of cases that haven't made it up there. I take your point, though. It will become more difficult, and we'll have to face that challenge when we get there. That'll be a nice challenge to have. That Participedia is so extensive that we can't find new cases.
Yeah. If I can just add, Eliza, your question that you posed, that Graham just responded to. So we are working quite hard at the University of Toronto in Scarborough, together with colleagues in South Africa and elsewhere, to upload more cases from Africa. And I know there's a big push to upload more cases from Latin America, and to really look at the sort of potential of participatory governance and participatory democracy for contexts in which most people actually participate more informally than formally. Yeah. Okay.
I'm just really quickly too, because I think that question about participation in authoritarian settings is absolutely fascinating. And so many of the students that I work with come from settings that are authoritarian or autocratic, or where participation isn't quite the same way that you would find in liberal democracies. And like Graham, one of the big elements that I teach in my course is thinking about the design characteristics of public participation. And so I always ask students who will say to me, this is really great, Nabatchi, but there's no way I could do this in my country. I'd be arrested or worse. I always say to them, well, what are some of the characteristics that we can think about to have participation not be driven by government, but bottom up? Can you organize groups of women to come talk about female empowerment issues and use some of the design characteristics of participation to help with that? Or if we're thinking about youth unemployment, what are some of the characteristics we know from participatory innovations in other places that might be translated into this context? What might have to change to do that? And those conversations, I think, are really important and really fascinating.
Can I just say one other thing, actually, or a couple of related things? One is that we're really poorly served on Participedia in relation to digital engagement, and also we don't have a huge amount of some of the really interesting direct legislation cases. So there are areas where there are clearly, lots of cases in those areas where we just haven't. It's a lot to do with the prejudices of the people who designed Participedia in the first place. You can kind of tell that it was people in North America and Europe who came up with this idea, and that they were interested in particular types of cases. And now, as the Participedia community is broadening, hopefully the conceptualization and the range of cases broadens at the same time.
Yeah. And there's a question by Eliza just about cases from Cuba. We really encourage cases, especially from countries where there are few cases that have been submitted. So that would be excellent, Eliza. I just want to go back to a question from Alice. Alice, you asked a question around suggesting cases for students. Graham and Tina, do you encourage your students to enhance and add to existing entries? Or do you focus on asking them to produce new entries?
So a number of my students have dealt with what we call stubs on Participedia. There are a number of entries which are just a title and maybe a photograph or maybe a few lines. And I'm happy for my students to actually work up those stubs. If they want to do one which is partial, there's a stub, there's a partial, and then there's a kind of full case. They have to make a case to me that actually what they're going to do is to substantively add to it, that they're not just adding a few lines, and that it's going to be a rich, much richer case. So yes, I do allow them to deal with those ones that are already up there that maybe haven't been developed, or where we've just put up a name. So yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Tina, anything on that?
No, ditto to what Graham said. It's quite easy to find the stubs, and students, none of my students have taken up the opportunity though to build stubs. To build up the stubs. They prefer to go find their own cases, typically from their own home countries.
Okay, great. I'd like to go back to a question that was posted early on. You know, professors from other universities, perhaps not participating organizations or institutions in Participedia, and if they would like to include the work they do with their students on Participedia.net, how do they go about it, and what are the opportunities for that? Graham?
I'm going first all the time. Do you want to go first on that one, Tina, or shall I go?
Tina?
Okay.
So great, Graham. I'll just say ditto to all of them.
Okay, all right.
Okay, Tina?
Am I going first or not? I don't know. What's happening?
You're going first, Graham.
Okay, so the first thing to say is anybody can put anything on Participedia. There isn't a gatekeeper here. It's open access. It's basically a wiki format. So you are absolutely free to get your students to put material up there, for you to put material up there yourself. There is no, anyone can use that. If you are using it with your students, I would suggest that you do what I do, which is after they've completed the assignment, that there's then a short period where you're working with them to make sure that it's a good quality thing, not just don't just say, "Oh, chuck your assignment up," get them to reflect on the feedback you've given to them. But my students could, if they wanted to, have gone up on day one and put a case up there, because anyone can put a case up. So I just think it's about providing them with the support to do it well, because especially if it's something that they want to show to the outside world, that's our role of helping them shape it. You're going to say ditto, Tina, are you?
Ditto. I'll also add to that, Scott Fletcher, who's on this webinar, I think he'd be a really great resource for people who want to use Participedia in the classroom. One of the things that I understand Participedia is trying to build in through its teaching team is an area of the website that's dedicated to materials to help teachers in the classrooms. And so I believe there are instructions on Participedia for faculty who want to use Graham's approach of having students build cases. Hopefully the resources that I'm creating with my students will also be up there eventually. So there should be some teaching resources. And because we're a site about participation and innovation, I think we would love to hear from others about how they're teaching participation and what innovations they're using in the classroom.
Yeah, just to follow on to Tina, so we are building up that teaching space on the platform, and we will allow, sort of open up space for people to share course outlines, assignment guidelines, rubrics, whatever they feel has been useful and interesting in their own teaching of Participedia in the classrooms. So we really want to open up sharing some of the teaching resources more globally. I just want to go back to a previous question. There was a question about sort of what literature on techniques of participation or theories Participedia offers, and whether we sort of offer banks of literature. I wonder, Graham and Tina, whether you can speak to that. So for people new to Participedia who want to get a sense of, the literature that people are reading and using in their classroom, where should they go? What should they look out for? Graham?
No, Tina.
Tina.
Well, I think, again, the Teaching and Learning Resource Center, which will be posted to Participedia, I think sometime this summer, I would look at those syllabi to see what people are including in their classes then. I believe another piece of it was going to be connections and links to various articles and books that covered topics on participation. Yeah. And if you are interested, I'd be more than happy to share my syllabi and my list of readings with people. I'm the only Nabatchi around. So you Google, you're going to find me. Send an email, and I'd be more than happy to share those materials with people.
Yeah, same for me. You just Google Smith and you'll find me. I think this is a shortcoming of the platform at the moment, in the sense that it is what it is. It's cases, methods, and organisations. And I think a lot of the stuff that we're talking about will be found in the teaching section, and it may well be that one of the things that the teaching committee may want to do is to create a short list of introductory books which are useful for people to read and use. I mean, clearly you've only got to read Tina's and my books, and then that you're fine. But there are apparently other people have written things as well, so I've been told. But you know, I think that's something which the teaching centre, and it's an interesting question about whether that also needs to be flagged as a resource more generally, not just for teaching, but also background material on participation. But that's very useful insight that we should, I guess we created it thinking we needed a place for cases. And of course now people are going to the cases and not necessarily knowing about the rest of the work that's going on. So that's a very helpful point.
Great. Okay, a question for Tina from Ricky. I'm just going to read it out, Tina. I wonder if you have run your exercises with multiple cohorts and whether different cohorts produce quite different findings. For example, different cohorts interpreting how to evaluate participation in quite different ways.
That's a great question. I no longer teach the course on participation, but when I did, besides having them do a case for Participedia, I also created this large whole classroom assignment where we would run a participation exercise for the community. And so the students had to do everything. They had to design the program, do the participant recruitment, figure out the logistics, come up with an evaluation plan, produce the report at the end. And that was really great. As long as I could find a client, right, who really needed participation on an issue, because from my perspective, doing participation without the connection to something can be quite challenging. So one year I couldn't find a client to do a participatory exercise with, and students had to come up with their own designs. Imagine a topic that you would like to do, design something. And it was really interesting. Several people picked the same topic, and the groups came up with quite different designs and quite different evaluation plans, which from my perspective was great because it showed that there is no single way to approach these things, that there are multiple designs that can work, that will give you perhaps different outcomes. So I think that when we've never done anything quite like Ricky is suggesting, but we've done it in other ways that show different kinds of outcomes, different designs, different evaluation plans can all be used around the same topic.
Okay, thank you, Tina. There's a question from David. Does Participedia have any extra media wiki extras to support case entry and classification?
This is probably where we need Jessie to come back on, actually. She's hiding behind us all. Yeah. She's hiding behind.
Jessie, do you want to respond to that question?
I would maybe ask Scott to respond.
Okay.
Scott? He's been very involved in that process.
Okay. Scott?
We're talking about the guidelines, I guess, for entering cases, potentially, that exist.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's meant by Media Wiki, but there are guidelines for entering the cases, and there's also a database that says that works behind Participedia. So we ask people who are writing cases to also code those cases for different elements. And I'm not quite sure if that's what this person means by Media Wiki, but there is a classification system across a number of variables and dimensions that lies behind all of the cases.
He seems to be actually asking about, David seems to be asking about extra software. I'm not sure there is that. I mean, one thing I wanted to say actually and forgot is that we have done a soft launch of the new version of Participedia, which I guess is Participedia 3.0, for those of us who have watched the various progressions of this, which is now participedia.xyz, which you can see on the right-hand corner of the slides. And that allows you to make entries in much easier fashion with much less data. Obviously, it's not what you want for your students to be doing necessarily, but it does make the upload of information and data much easier. But I don't think I'm afraid it's beyond our ken in terms of the software that's being used. Sorry about that.
I can jump in on that a little bit as well. We are on GitHub, and we have APIs that technologists can access if they want to build on what Participedia has already started, and feel free to get in touch with with us about that if you're interested in the technology side.
And one thing I'll say is one of the really cool things I think that we're building for the new site is an automatic translation feature. So, I mean, right now you can enter cases or entries in whatever language you want. But just to increase accessibility, what we're going to do is every single entry that's uploaded will automatically be Google translated into all different types of languages. And so once you access the entry, you can obviously edit it because Google Translate is only so perfect. And so you can, clean up the translation. But, for just general purposes of people searching the web, that's going to increase the amount of traffic and the amount of eyes on cases that, people wouldn't necessarily access just because it is in a different language.
That's so cool. I'm so thrilled that we're doing that. It's awesome.
Yeah, that was a really cool feature that, that's not me, that's our web development team, but no, so that'll be, I like that because that does make things a bit more accessible. I think maybe David, as far as like the media wiki, I mean, I'm not totally sure if you're asking more about like places to find ideas for case entries. That has been a struggle. I mean, actually, there really, like Graham said, there's no end to possible cases to be entered on the site. I mean, it's quite daunting actually to try and keep up with the number that are going on right now, because Participedia does actually take a fairly expansive view of things that constitute cases. So we do everything from protests to really small like internal management of say a company. So it's just anything that includes people, the people that are affected by issues in making the decisions. I do keep sort of a running list in a spreadsheet that I can send to everyone in the chat. It's very incomplete, but it kind of gives you a sense of all of the cases. I mean, there's hundreds that I've entered on there that have not yet been written into Participedia, and there's the ability for you to actually give your students that spreadsheet and they can have a look at them, and they can sign up to be the author of those on Participedia. And a lot of them though are fairly well known, winning sort of IOPD awards and whatnot. So there's I would just tell your students to Google things, honestly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Scott. We've got another 2 minutes left for the formal part. People can stay on if they want to continue chatting, and Scott will be with you. But I just want to get back to an earlier question from Alexandra Cohen. Alexandra, the question about case studies from Latin America, the ones you've read. We've got a number of Latin American partners now, more in Brazil, and we are hoping to really expand the number of Latin American cases, including, also the African cases, the East Asian, South Asian cases. So we're hoping that people will start uploading more cases from the Global South. The cases, if you want to find the Latin American cases, you can find them on the site, the new site. There's also a map, which is an interactive map, which makes it quite easy to just see where cases have been uploaded. But we are really hoping to expand the number of cases from the Global South.
Tina, can I just say something there, just briefly? There's been quite a bit of work being done on the data form for the new XYZ site, because it was recognised, not intentionally, but by the people who originally designed Participedia, people like myself, that we tended to have certain types of cases in our minds, as we were, and that really structured the way we thought about how to collect data. And so over the past couple of years, a lot of work has been done to try and make sure that the data form doesn't, if you like, crowd out certain ways of thinking about participation. Particularly, there was a lot of criticism, and rightly so, from researchers who are focusing on the global south, saying that these categories are too much focused on European and North American cases. So one thing I hope, and you never know, with the new version of the site is it becomes a much more accessible, a much more ecumenical framework for uploading cases. So I just think that's worth mentioning. It also annoyingly means I've got to create a new Word document with the new data form, but that's my problem.
Okay. Thank you very much, Graham. And Graham's been working very hard at this. The last comment from Robert to everybody, to Graham, that's starting, teaching with cases and then moving on to theory is what Dewey recommends. And there you go. Okay. So I'd like to thank everybody so much for joining us in our first Participedia Teaching and Learning webinar. We've got 3 other webinars coming up. The next one is on September the 26th, and it's entitled Teaching and Learning for Democratic Participation, Reflecting on Practice in Higher Education. Here we will focus on what we mean by democratic pedagogy and look at examples of using democratic pedagogies in the classroom. The third webinar is on October the 31st. And here the focus will be on coaching and mentoring professionals in the uses and research of public participation. And the fourth one will be on the global context of participation. So how does context, political context in different parts of the world shape the teaching of democratic pedagogies? And here the reflections will be on politics, conflict, and power. So we hope that you will join us for the rest of our webinar series. I'd like to thank Graham and Tina so much for being our first guinea pigs. I think they did an excellent job, and thank you all participants for all of your questions. I think they were great questions. I'd like to thank Scott, Fletcher, and Jessie Carson for all their help, enormous help in setting up the webinar, especially because some of us are very inexperienced in this. And then I just want to announce that Scott will be staying on to facilitate discussions via chat for those who want to stay on a bit. Graham and Tina, do you want to say a few quick farewell words?
Well, just thank you to everybody for taking time out of your day to jump in. Again, apologize for my technical difficulties there, but it's really exciting to see so many people so interested in Participedia and the ideas of democratic innovation. So thank you for coming.
Ditto.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, and goodbye.
Bettina, you want to mute your mic? We can hear you typing.
Sorry.
Yeah, so if anyone wants to stay on to chat with one another, network or anything, we'll just keep the lines open for a bit here. You can unmute your mic by, I think it's Alt A.
This is Ricky speaking. I have a question for the kind of group as a whole, following on from one earlier, which was someone asked about experience with using sort of democratic technologies in the classroom. And if anyone has experience with that, I'd be very interested to hear about it. It's something I'm planning to try and experiment with in the next semester. I'm planning a course on democracy in the digital age, and I thought it'd be useful to kind of introduce students to some of the technologies that exist as a practical way of them understanding what how technology might facilitate democracy. But I have no experience of doing that, so any lessons that people have would be really interesting.
Do you mean like I know I've kind of used like existing portals, because I find that a lot of the online tools now that public officials are using, you know, for example, like I know Madrid has a big sort of public service portal. You can actually sign up from anywhere. I know the one for the Reykjavik, the Iceland public, I think they've got a public planning, participatory planning, and a participatory public budgeting platform. Yeah. And you can actually sign up, and you don't have to live in Iceland, funnily enough. And you know, whatever, you can make up an address. And you can actually play around with it and go into it and see what, you know, you can upvote, you know, what people are saying. You can ask questions. So you get a really good sense. And there's more, I find that there's more municipalities, and I know in the States anyways, states or regions or counties, I guess, that have sort of larger portals that will give you access to a number of different tools that you can then sort of play around with and look at how they're being used. Does that kind of help?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole load of tools, right? There's probably 100 or so of them. I just wondered if anyone's actually used any of them, like in the classroom, and had any success with that. So I also had a look at the one used for the Better Reykjavik.
Yeah.
And there's some others like Lumio, right? And
yeah.
Decent. And there's a whole range of them. If anyone's had any practical experience with them, then that would be very interesting to me. But I don't want to dominate the discussion either. So.
No, that's fine. I mean, yeah, for sure. In the chat, actually, there was a digital engagement census that was done by a partner of ours. And what he actually looked at, he just sent out a call to a whole bunch of different organizations and individuals and different agencies. You know, how do you use technology for any of your work? And so he's actually got now a very good list. I don't know if you can access the link in the chat there.
Yeah, I'm just looking at that. It's very interesting.
It's actually, and this was just the engagement census this time round. So you can actually go. He's got, I think, you know, if you go back in his blog, I can try and find the link. But he did a census like this back in, you know, 2014 or 2015. So there's a lot more of these.
I'm going now anyway.
Perfect. That's really helpful. I'll take a proper look at that.
Yeah, here's a full list. I'll just paste that in. I think there's like, I don't know, 10 pages of these things. I don't think all of them are necessarily all being used, but you can still, a lot of them you can access on, you know, the Wayback Machine and on. You could also ask like your students if they use any. I'm just looking here, they've got like change.org, and I mean, I'm in Canada, but change.org has been huge for getting sort of petitions to the government, just because we don't really have any other way of doing that.
Yeah.
Scott, I need to leave now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for hanging on, and enjoy your discussion, everybody. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks, Bettina.
I had a comment for Tina. I don't know if she's actually still on, because she asked a question about how she could get feedback on some of the things she's been doing from practitioners from different places. And I wondered about whether the IAP2 network would be kind of a useful place for her to do that, because they kind of operate all around the world.
I think Tina's actually gone, but we'll definitely pass that on.
Okay.
I've actually been working with Tina because her students have been publishing some great articles on the PA Times, the Public Administration Times, so yeah, I've sent her a number. I found that like LinkedIn and Facebook, there's a number of groups that people are really engaged, and we're actually, with the launch of our new website, we're wanting to really revamp the Participedia Facebook group, because the page that we've got, we kind of just send stuff out into the ether and there's not much engagement. But I think in groups, people tend to be a bit more lively and engaged. So we're gonna start. I manage all the social media postings as well. So I'm gonna start maybe posting more stuff like questions, and so maybe some of that will be from Tina, and I know that folks in the IAP2, it kind of crosses over, and we also might do some cross posting with them.
Hi, this is Pat, and sort of building on the IAP2 question, by coincidence, I've had 3 very interesting conversations at different meetings over the past few months with different people from IAP2, and I'm behind on getting back to them. Actually, I see Cassie Hemphill is on the list of people participating today. So hi, Cassie. And we've actually built the IAP2 spectrum into the new data collection model. And actually, I just heard from someone a couple of days ago that is suggesting, Marty Rozelle, that we work with them to add the backlog of people who won the annual IAP2 awards as cases on the site. So we'll be talking with them about that.